So if you could kindly unmute Dr.
Of course,
Songwe.
of course. Yes, 1 year into this, we're not yet used to unmuting before we start speaking. Hopefully we never get used to it. So again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As you have heard, this is the launch of our report, Building Forward Towards an African Green Economy. We thought that as we continue to look at how we get out of this crisis, we should begin to see how we also plan for the future. Planning for the future is an important part of succeeding in the future. And part of it requires that we plan together, plan collectively, and plan in a multilateral fashion. The report we are releasing today, I think, continues to emphasize the need for support for the recovery, because we believe that we still have Africa in its response phase. We need additional resources to finalize the immediate response to the crisis. I think, as we all know, and as many of you probably know, because we're all waiting on vaccine list, this is probably the end of the response and the beginning of the recovery is when we have a shot in our arms. And at least, let's say, we want herd immunity at 60%. So maybe the recovery will start when we have 50% vaccinated and we're headed towards the last 10%. So we're still there. We are still in a response phase. We need that in many economies. That has begun with vaccinations. On the continent, I think we're very happy to say that COVAX is starting to vaccinate. At least we have a now plan for the first 10 million vaccines. Hopefully that the continent will also be able to say that it gets to 60% by the summer is the target of the African Union, and hopefully with COVAX and the AVAT we can get there. On the financial side, of course, we need additional liquidity. We want to extend the DSSI so that those who are still teetering on the verge of falling into poverty can get some assistance and stay above the poverty line. Africa was at 48% poverty ratio before this crisis. That number is certainly going to drop, but we hope it doesn't drop too much. But most importantly, when we get into the recovery, which is where I think it becomes everybody's business, we would like for that recovery to be green. What the report is showing, working with the London School of Economics and Vivid Economics and the Economic Commission for Africa, is that there are actually good stories to tell in terms of how we grow green, how we grow out of this greener and better. Before the crisis, we needed to create 13 million jobs for the continent to be able to absorb all the youth that we're getting in the job market. Post-crisis, we're going to need to do more. And I think what the report shows is that it is doable if we decide to do a green recovery. But a green recovery requires investments. And so how do we get those investments? We need to find ways, getting more blended finance, getting more of the private sector to join in the recovery process. I think we show in the report that it's good business, it's doing well, it's doing good, and it's creating jobs, and it's a path clearly to getting us back on track to the SDGs. And finally, in the reset phase, once we've done that, we talk a little bit about what kind of multilateral system we're going to need to make sure that once we get on that recovery track, it is a track that is sustainable. And the beautiful thing about it is that the UK is hosting COP26. And so as we build towards COP26, what are the conversations we should be having to ensure that we don't have yet another crisis, and that if we have another one, the response and the recovery are much faster than we have seen when there is an absence of a multilateral system that kicks in for global pandemics or for global economic recessions or for global climate change impacts. So once again, happy to have everybody here with us, and hopefully we will enjoy the report, but more importantly, come together to see how some of the challenges in the report we can work together as the United Nations family, the academic community, the financial community, and most importantly, actually, the information community. We need a lot more information out there. People need to go get vaccinated. We need to invest in green, and we need to come together to work together. And that requires a lot of communication about why all these are good things. So again, thanks to everybody for joining us, and hopefully we have a good hour in front of us. And thanks, Jean-Paul and the team, for doing the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Songwe. Thank you for your remarks. And I think that we got the message. Everybody needs to be vaccinated and to be ready for the recovery time, and a green recovery time, as you mentioned. I now have the pleasure to give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Albert Mushanga, who is the African Union Commissioner for Trade and Industry. Mr. Mushanga.
Thank you very much, Director of Ceremony. And I greet each and every one of you, Your Excellencies, the Honorable Ministers, and the other distinguished participants in this meeting. And I'm very glad to be with you on the launch of this report on building forward together for an African recovery and a prosperous South Africa. I'm advised that there's a similar study on the economy of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And the report, a commendable achievement by the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, as well as the authors, and we extend very warm congratulations to each and every one of you. The report that is being launched will greatly contribute to the attainment of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the African Union Agenda 2063. And at the level of the African Union, these two documents have a common monitoring, evaluation, and reporting framework. African economies, like the rest of the world, are being hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic, both in terms of health and their economies. And as a result of this, the efforts we have been making in the past to reduce poverty have been undermined, greatly undermined. And with this development, we have a situation where the report, that both from South Africa and the DRC, they bring out very limited fiscal spaces of the two countries to respond very effectively to the COVID-19 pandemic. Gleaning from the report, we see that South Africa has earmarked 0.3% of our gross domestic product for recovery. And when this is contrasted with what is being done elsewhere, and the level for the G20 economies, excluding the European Union, is at 2.1% of GDP. And for the middle income countries is 1.6% of GDP, which is, when you look at the South African situation, quite inadequate. And the same picture applies to the Democratic Republic of the Republic of Congo. There we find that the fiscal stimulus amounts to about $11 per person. And it's about $20,800 per person in the case of the most advanced economies, and $680 per person in the case of the emerging market and developing countries. And with this background, what we envisage is that the infrastructure gaps, which we inherited from the era before the COVID-19 pandemic, are likely to grow in Africa. And this is in view of the fact that virtually all economies around the world are struggling to recover from the negative economic impacts of the pandemic. With this development, the key question is how to speedily mobilize resources for a green recovery and avoid this setback being another lost decade for Africa. I think, having said this, I would like to end my remarks and indicate that I have to rush for another engagement, because I only got the notification of this program around 18 hours yesterday, or 6 p.m. And I could not break the engagement, which is due in the next 10 minutes. So I'll not be able to participate in the question and answer. But as African Union, certainly we warmly welcome this report. And there are a lot of recommendations where we can sit together with the member states and the African Union, the Economic Commission for Africa, as well as the other stakeholders, to see how we can follow up on the recommendations. I will yield the floor and thank you very much. And like I indicated, I have to move out now. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your remarks, and thank you for joining us this morning for the launch of that report. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Nicholas Kay, representative of COP26 presidency. Mr. Kay, the floor is yours. Please don't forget to unmute yourself.
Following Vera's example, I'm determined not to get used to this means. Pathetic excuse, actually, it's just my memory. But anyway, dear colleagues, Excellency Dr. Vera Sangwe, also Albert Muchanga, the Trade and Industry Commissioner, colleagues from Oxford. Greetings on behalf of the Right Honourable Alok Sharma, who is the COP President Designate, as you know, but is unfortunately unable to be with you today. But I work closely with him as the COP26 Regional Ambassador to Africa. And I should say from the start that our role as COP Presidency Designate is not a UK bilateral role. We have the pleasure and the duty to act in the interests of all 197 parties to the climate conventions. And so as such, you know, we are doing our best as an honest broker to work with 197 parties to achieve success in November. It's not a coincidence that as COP presidency, we are so focused on Africa. You may have noticed in the last 3 weeks, the COP president designate has visited 4 African countries. He's been to Ethiopia, he was there in Addis a few weeks ago, Nigeria, Egypt, and Gabon as well. And this is really a sort of indication of the priority we're giving to Africa in COP26. Today, as I speak, our high-level champion, Nigel Topping, is in Kenya as well. It's also part of the reason why the UK has been working with the African Union and with UNECA and previously with South Africa and now with the DRC on the AU Green Recovery Action Plan as well. This again is because we have a deep belief really that there is no other continent that needs a successful COP26 than Africa. Africa needs it more than anywhere else. But I'm also convinced that we will not have a successful COP26 unless Africa's needs and requirements are fully addressed and served by COP26. So as John Kerry has said fairly recently, I mean, we see COP26 as the world's last best chance. And our aim as presidency is to inject ambition, urgency, and inclusion into all the work that we do in the next few months. And specifically, we want to achieve at least 4 things in Glasgow. One is to have real net zero commitments and near-term plans and targets from all the major emitters. Secondly, to have more and better quality finance available. And thirdly, for adaptation to be given equal priority to mitigation and adaptation plans to be prioritized. And then fourthly, underpinning a lot of this is to finalize some of the Paris rulebook, and particularly Article 6, which will unlock a lot of the carbon market that's necessary. So today's event and the reports, which look to me like excellent real reports, I mean, they're a reminder that we're not operating and preparing COP26 in a vacuum. In the real world, if you like, COVID-19 is making things more difficult and more urgent. The harsh economic realities are very clear. We're doing this in an environment in which there is less money available. And there will be less money available from developed countries and donors. And that is a sad reality. Second is that there is also more pressure now to take quick and dirty options. And as countries, make choices about their future and building forward better and recovery, avoiding that temptation is really, really important. And it's not just a temptation, it's a reality. I mean, I was speaking the other day to the Malawi Minister for Environment, and she was stressing how during the COVID crisis, deforestation has accelerated dramatically because people have needed the fuel, the charcoal to cook and even to make business from. So I think one report, I saw the white paper, the Jeff report, said during the COVID crisis over the last 12 months, deforestation across the world has accelerated by 50%. So yeah, it's a difficult moment, but looking forward, I mean, I think as COP presidency, we take three things to encourage us from the COVID crisis. And that is generally that, when the world is facing an existential crisis and the survival of millions of people is in question, first, money can be found. And we've seen that in the COVID response. Secondly, science and innovation can save us. And we've seen that again in the speed of the development of vaccines, et cetera, and science and technology will guide us through the climate crisis. And then thirdly, that multilateral cooperation is the only way. And so whether it's through WHO or support for COVAX, which I'm very proud that the UK is second funder for COVAX, COP26, the G20, the G7, which we are presidency of this year, through these mechanisms, we shall, as our hashtag says, hashtag come together for our planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Nicholas Kay, for your remarks. And I now give the floor to Jean-Paul Adam, who is the Director, Technology, Climate Change and Natural Resources Management Division of the ECA. Jean-Paul, the floor is yours. And we see on the screen the slides. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And I will go immediately to the slides. I trust everybody can see it. And first of all, to thank Her Excellency Dr. Vera Songwe for her remarks and for her support. To thank the AU Commissioner Albert Muchanga for his remarks and support from the African Union, and also to His Excellency Sir Nicholas Kay for the support which has been forthcoming from the COP presidency. To add, just to introduce myself once again, my name is Jean-Paul Adam, and I'm the Director for Technology, Climate Change and Natural Resources at the Economic Commission for Africa. In this report, we are addressing, first of all, the triple crisis that Africa is facing. We are also looking at the needs for an immediate response, the approach towards a green recovery, and the reset that is required. So Africa is facing this triple crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic has underlined the interconnectivity between human health, economic growth, and nature. And as our UN Secretary General has remarked, it's time to flick the green switch. We need to respond, recover, and reset. And the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa has outlined policy opportunities for countries to invest through green stimulus to help build forward better. This builds on an African Union green stimulus program, which was adopted by the African Union Ministers of Environment conference in January. These opportunities build on two case studies that we have done in partnership with the University of Oxford and Vivid Economics. And the two case studies concern the Republic of South Africa and the Democratic Republic of Congo. But there will be further case studies that will be presented later in the year. We examine the immediate response which countries have undertaken and need to undertake. And the focus is on then the green recovery, moving from a rescue mode to a recovery mode that provides immediate impact while also building green sectors to enhance resilience. We also need to consider the reset, how we create the conditions for transformation and how we change the multilateral development system to address this. So first and foremost, the impact of climate change is as pronounced as COVID-19, and arguably more so because it has been over a longer period of time. So most African countries are projected to lose between 2 and 5% of GDP to climate change by 2030, but this is very much down to conservative estimates. We can see that in scenarios of more than 4 degrees of warming, losses rise up to 15% of GDP, and some regions are particularly affected, such as the Sahel. It should be noted also that in 2019, as reported in the State of the Climate Report in Africa, some African countries spent up to 9% of their GDP in responding to climate-related disasters, such as droughts, flooding, and landslides. So this immediate reactivity cost is a heavy burden on African countries. The health impact of COVID-19 has been dramatic, and the COVID-19 pandemic has challenged the ability of African countries to respond. African countries have had exemplary public health responses in many scenarios, building on their experiences of tackling other infectious diseases. Innovation has allowed the procurement of, for example, personal protective equipment to be upscaled quickly, and the African Medical Supplies Platform, which ECA contributed to mobilize using the opportunities of e-commerce, has a pipeline of $946 million in gross merchandise value. But Africa is paying an increasingly heavy toll. Death rates have risen in the second wave. Across the continent, the case fatality ratios are on average 2.5%, with over 2.7 million infected as of end of February 2021. This will lead to increasing burdens on the fiscal space, as we have already heard from numerous presenters. Africa is having more and more trouble in responding, and this is going to be particularly important in terms of the procurement of vaccines to be able to bring in this additional liquidity. So Africa's current economic model is not fit for purpose in the context of the vulnerability that African countries face. Existing economic models are predominantly focused on export of commodities. These commodities are typically extractive in nature with limited value addition. Exports were rising by 25% up to January 2020, but were dramatically impacted by the first wave. While exports are gradually increasing, they do not on their own provide a path out of the crisis. And the levels of growth were also insufficient to achieve the SDGs even before the crisis. To note that mining and utilities in Africa contribute 11% of Africa's output, but only account for 1.4% of the workforce. So towards the beginning of the fourth quarter of last year, exports were still falling by 10%. Moving towards the immediate response, African countries have been responding with a mix of different policy options. The realities of tight fiscal space have meant that the African response has been much smaller in comparison to those in OECD countries. Crucially, Africa has the least developed network of social safety nets. Hence, the largest number of people whose work and income generating potential has been disrupted, with 22% of people unable to work as normal. This figure, however, does not fully reflect the extent of disruption, as the vast majority of African employment remains informal. This is situated in an environment where African countries have very limited access to affordable finance. Access to affordable finance is at the heart of the differential between sums invested in Africa compared to investments in OECD countries. A relatively limited number of countries have access to markets, and when they do, it is at high prices. Most African countries can only borrow at above 10%, or in the best case scenario, just below. You will note that South Africa has a rate of borrowing at around 8%, although it may have dropped a little bit recently. This situation is also contributing towards rising levels of debt in Africa. Even before the onset of COVID-19, Africa's debt levels were rising fast, and Africa's external debt stock has more than doubled in the last decade. As of December 2020, 6 of the 7 countries globally in debt distress were African countries, while 15 out of 28 countries at risk of debt distress were from Africa. So more than half of the countries at risk of debt distress. The importance of stimulus and timely stimulus is one of the elements that is highlighted in this report. ECA estimates that Africa would have achieved a positive growth rate of 2.2% in 2020 if it had implemented a fiscal stimulus of approximately 100 billion in the same year. Postponing the fiscal stimulus by 1 year, i.e., that is until 2021, cost the continent at least 4.9 percentage points in 2020 and 0.5 percentage points in lost GDP growth in 2021. This is equivalent to $116 billion based on a GDP of $2.5 trillion in lost growth. And it should be noted that in terms of disbursements and commitments in 2020, $56 billion was committed, while $35 billion was actually disbursed. The impact in terms of a green response and a green recovery is about investing now in sectors that help us to build forward better. And this is building around the principles of investing in resilient infrastructure, in particular energy, transportation, and communication, human capital, looking at a healthy and well-educated population, looking at secure and resilient food supplies, ensuring that there is respect for natural capital and that this is also contributing towards economic development, and also reviewing markets and financial systems. First and foremost, investing in human capital requires investing in a health response and continuing education, which ensures that there is acceleration towards universal health coverage and universal access to education. This is critical for ensuring that there are equal income earning opportunities and also addressing the gender gaps that exist in wider economic outcomes across the continent. Investment in these sectors is cross-cutting for successful implementation of green recovery strategy. Resilient infrastructure depends on investment in energy. And we can note that 590 million African citizens still do not have access to electricity. Providing that access is a foremost priority. There are also numerous investments that already exist. There are 39,000 megawatts of potential renewable energy investments already identified across the continent under the Economic Commission for Africa's SDG 7 initiative. The investments required are in generation, but also in transmission lines and grid upgrades. In some countries, rapid investment in mini-grids provides an opportunity to dramatically multiply income earning potential at community level. And this is one of the key takeaways from the case study on DRC, which we'll hear more detail about from the University of Oxford. Africa has already prioritized renewables with 22,000 megawatts already announced in Africa's nationally determined contributions. We should note that renewable energy investment also facilitates inclusion with an analysis by the International Renewable Energy Agency showing that 32% of jobs in renewables are taken up by women, as opposed to 22% in fossil fuel sectors. We should also note that priority investments identified under the African Union PIDA infrastructure framework feature 19 energy projects, of which only one is fossil fuel based. The majority of projects are currently hydropower, reflecting the available natural resources, but there is scope to dramatically upscale into other areas of renewables such as solar and wind. Africa's ICT infrastructure is also a key part of a green recovery. And we have already seen the impact that Africa's innovation hubs have had in responding to the pandemic by, for example, facilitating the development of Africa's COVID-19 communication information platform and also the African medical supplies platform. The fourth industrial revolution has the potential to transform Africa's economy, increase its productivity, and enhance its global and regional trade, particularly in the context of WTO reforms and in the context of the AFCFTA. The way that telecommunications companies and more widely investments in ICT is done also needs to be addressed in the context of reducing emissions, as a large number of, for example, telecommunication towers in Africa currently use diesel generation, and this is contributing to the high rate of CO2 emissions in a number of African regions. And by adopting renewable energy in tandem with ICT infrastructure, we can accelerate growth. Food security is at the heart of a green recovery, and investment in agriculture is particularly essential because currently Africa imports 85% of its food to a value of $35 billion. This is a figure that covers the period 2016 to 2018. But the FAO expects that the import bill of Africa will rise to $110 billion by 2025, therefore creating further challenges. This is going to be exacerbated by the impact of climate change, which will reduce the yield on the main agricultural crops in Africa by 22%. A better recovery and the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area represent the opportunity to build resilient, climate-smart agriculture based on crop diversification, renewable energy, secure market access, and this market access implies protection as well from anti-competitive dumping practices, and also about reducing emissions in agriculture. The IFC has identified that there are already $80.1 billion worth of investments in climate smart agriculture, which can potentially create 5 million jobs while reducing emissions by up to 9.7 million tons. Nature-based solutions are also a key pillar of the green recovery. Nature-based solutions are means of rehabilitating natural environments while providing immediate employment and wealth creation opportunities. Both the Republic of South Africa and Democratic Republic of Congo case studies have shown significant opportunities for this to be leveraged. Since Africa's agriculture is responsible for 90% of deforestation and 2/3 of greenhouse gas emissions, we need to prioritize nature-based solutions alongside climate-smart agriculture. And that implies supporting rural communities involved in agriculture, building value chains, and also prioritizing agroforestry. There is also an opportunity to valorize Africa's carbon sinks. I am currently speaking from Brazzaville in the Republic of Congo, where we are currently hosting the African Regional Forum on Sustainable Development. And the peatlands of the Central Congo Basin, which cover both the Republic of Congo and the DRC, cover an area of 145,000 square kilometers and can lock in up to 30 billion tons of carbon, which is equivalent to 3 years' worth of the whole world's emissions. There's an opportunity to link the response with ecotourism and agroforestry opportunities. We should note that there are also opportunities around the blue economy, and that includes addressing water supplies by planting trees in water catchment areas, reducing disaster risks, again, by improving reforestation and improving inclusion. And in terms of the blue economy and oceanic areas, a recent study in networks of marine protected areas has shown that a 5% increase in marine protected areas leads to a 20% increase in yield in fisheries. We can note that there is an overdependence, which is already mentioned, on mineral extraction, but there is an opportunity to transition to low carbon technologies for the extraction, particularly of green economy minerals, such as in the DRC, where there are significant deposits of cobalt. Over 70% of the world's cobalt is in the DRC. By channeling COVID-19 stimulus packages into nature-based solutions alongside these mineral investments, we can mitigate the negative impact. The green stimulus impacts will be covered a little bit more in detail by the next presentation from Oxford University, but the headlines are that it has shown that green stimulus impacts relative to traditional, what we might call brown investments, in RSA has shown 250% more jobs in the short term. In the DRC has shown 130% more jobs in the short term. While in terms of the global value added throughout the economy, in RSA it has translated into 420%, while in the DRC it's 280%. In terms of the reset and allowing the transformation to take place, this is about creating conditions that allow African countries to be more resilient in relation to the global system. One of the key areas that we have looked at is recognizing that there is a dramatic challenge currently in terms of dealing with the financing for green stimulus and investment in green sectors. Carbon offsets provide an opportunity which is significant. Carbon offsets provide an opportunity which is very significant. And in terms of those opportunities, we can see that a 22% increase in renewable energy would lead to an opportunity for $434 to $527 million based on a relatively low carbon price of between 1.4 and 1.7 US per ton. Forestry and agriculture mitigation can mobilize up to $1 billion at the slightly higher price of $3.2 to $5.1 per ton, while giving 4.5 million people access to clean cooking can mobilize up to $241 million at a price of between 2.9 and 3.1 US dollars per ton. This, it should be flagged, is existing carbon prices, which are extremely low. The recommendations of the high-level panel on carbon pricing has called for prices that are between $50 and $80 per ton, and the IMF has recommended a price of at least $70 per ton. And we should note that Africa overall contributes to less than 4% of global emissions, while being home to 17% of the global population. So by investing in appropriate nature-based solutions, significant resources can be raised in addition to the jobs that are created by investment in those sectors. So to conclude, the elements about the reset are the focus particularly on financing. And Africa needs 100 billion per year over the next 3 years to avoid the lost decade, based on the gap of $345 billion, which has been identified by the IMF. The immediate response should prioritize providing additional liquidity to economies through the extension of the debt service suspension initiative. This should be to the end of 2021 and, if possible, to the end of 2022. In addition, the provision of an initial allocation of special drawing rights from a new issuance is essential, and the maintenance by partners of assistance levels is very important to be able to achieve the SDGs. Fiscal space created by these steps can help governments protect their societies in the immediate, reduce inequalities. The green economy, the green recovery analysis shows that these investments can generate substantial returns from for African countries and their partners. This requires looking at de-risking, in particular, the methodologies for financing. Some of the options include through liquidity and a sustainability facility, which is covered in another UNECA paper released last year on building forward together for a green recovery. There are also the opportunity for green and blue bonds, which would be linked to SDGs and would require credit enhancements to assure affordability. There's the opportunity to address the debt overhang in terms of debt for climate or debt for nature swaps. And there is an opportunity to address illicit financial flows through domestic resource mobilization, combating financial flows. The reset is about ensuring that the financing available for these green recovery sectors, despite the debt challenges and lack of fiscal space. The modeling shows that it will pay for itself, and so we're reminding you that the provision of the required 100 billion per year can allow African countries to bounce back very, very significantly. The delay in stimulus can cost 5.4% in lost opportunities in terms of growth opportunity for African countries. It is essential that we look at this as alongside reforms of African financial markets, which can be developed but precisely require access to appropriate capital, which can come both from domestic resource mobilization and from external investment. We thank everyone for their attention, and we appreciate the opportunity to have presented these elements here, which will be substantiated by the case studies which will be presented by the University of Oxford. Thank you, and back to you, moderator.
Thank you so much, Jean-Paul Adam, for this very detailed and interesting presentation. And I kindly tell all our audience that you are going to share this presentation after the launch of the report by mail with the different attendees. As you mentioned, there are two case studies. One is related to the Prosperous Green South African case study. That's the name of the study, focusing on South Africa. And another one is focusing on DRC Congo. So we will first give the floor to Brian O'Callaghan, that is going to detail the case study on South Africa. Brian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Katrine, and well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be with you today, and to our colleagues at the Economic Commission for Africa, congratulations on your ongoing work, and Thank you for bringing us together for what is, at least in our view, one of the most essential conversations in our world today. Your Excellency, Ambassador Sir Kay, Your Excellency Commissioner Mushanga, Executive Secretary Dr. Songwe, and my good friend Mr. Jean-Paul Adam, we're honored to be presenting alongside you. So today we will be presenting new reports and insights on how green investment can set Africa up for a more prosperous future. We did hope to have slides. I'm wondering if those are still coming up. Or would you prefer for me to present them directly?
I think it might be better for you to present directly, Brian, but I can share them from my side if you wish, if that's easier.
No problem. I'm just getting them up here. Okay, hopefully you can all see that now. So here we go. Alongside UNECA, there are two organizations behind this work, which have both been mentioned numerous times so far. The first is the Oxford University Economic Recovery Project, of which I am the lead. We help global leaders, business and society, all to understand how investment today can maximize growth while also delivering environmental and social benefits. Vivid Economics is represented today by Dr. Julia Bird, who will be following my presentation. And Vivid Economics are a global leader in economic consultancy. They target a wide range of sectors with particular interest in understanding how to combat climate change and how to boost innovation. Personally, my name is Brian O'Callaghan. I'm not a climate scientist or an expert on the environment. I'm an engineer and an economist who happens to work on big projects that can both help the economy and the environment. I'm in Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, and I also work for the Boston Consulting Group. Importantly for this conversation, I was born just outside of Johannesburg, although now I'm obviously based in Oxford. So today I have two very simple messages. And these messages are supported by the two reports we're releasing, one for the Republic of South Africa and the other for the Democratic Republic of the Congo. First, sustainable investment will drive sustainable growth. Now that sounds simple, and it is. The question you need to ask yourself is, if it's so simple, why aren't we doing it? Why aren't international partners stepping in to fund sustainable investment? And why does Africa continue to lag behind? To the second, because sustainable investment and particularly green investment have such positive economic, social, and political and environmental implications rather, that could each really help accelerate Africa's trajectory, we implore the international community to generously partner for the long term. That means things like concessional finance. That means nations looking beyond their own borders. It's time to take each of these issues, both on climate and development in Africa, seriously. Now, Executive Secretary Songwe mentioned a key distinction between rescue and recovery spending. I think that's so essential to this conversation. Rescue spending is all about keeping businesses and people alive. It's what we've seen throughout Africa and most of the world today. Recovery spending, on the other hand, that's what comes next. That's about reinvigorating the economy to get to prior levels, but really to advance beyond those two. So far, there has been some spending in Africa. A lot of it supported by multilaterals, particularly in the DRC. That's been the case. The Republic of South Africa has been playing a leading role here, but when you look at it compared to the rest of the world, I think one presenter mentioned, we've seen $11 US spent per person in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. That compares to 20,800 on average across emerging economies. And now to the recovery part. When you look at recovery spending, the picture is much worse. And the statistics are in the report, so I won't dwell on them now, but let's just say that in the DRC, recovery spending is $47 million US today. Now, that's the price of an expensive apartment in New York for an entire country. What's driving this? Well, first, as I said, African nations have been spending on rescue to date, and that makes a lot of sense. We're keeping people and businesses alive. But second, as the ambassador stated so well, there's just less money available. African nations face higher costs of debt, which means higher interest rates. And in COVID, many of them, including the DRC, as you'll see in our report, have been operating under even further stretched balance sheets. I think in the DRC, revenues are down, taxation revenues are down something like 50%. Now, let's look to the findings, the purpose of our reports themselves. In 2020, I worked with Nobel Prize winner Joseph Stiglitz and Nick Stern and others on a paper in the Oxford Review of Economic Policy that showed that green policies can deliver strong economic returns alongside strong environmental returns. You don't have to trade one for the other. But there was this big question that remained outstanding. Are all of those green opportunities as strong in Africa as they are in these high income countries where, you know, a lot of the conversations have been had so far? Over the past months, we've got a very clear answer, in some ways driven, partly driven by a vivid economics expert modeling, but also by our own analysis. The answer is yes. By some arguments, because of the development opportunities from things like green energy, spending in green arenas is even stronger in developing and emerging economies than elsewhere. And that's great news. Specifically in our report, and Julia will go into further detail on this, we looked at ongoing trends and economic opportunities for South Africa and the DRC to identify 3 particularly strong opportunities in each. And they're on the screen there. Those opportunities have strong prospects at boosting short-term economic growth following the COVID crisis, crafting strong development opportunities in the medium term, and also meeting the environmental needs and objectives of the global world into the long term. Now in the report, we go into greater detail on each, and as I say, my colleague Julia will mention them in a moment. Just to highlight, to complement some of the input, trend analysis, and investigation of the different options available, Vivid's modeling not only looked at, you know, which green opportunity works well compared to another, but also how do they work compared to traditional options. So for example, does renewable energy make more sense for jobs and growth compared to coal plants? And what about electric vehicles versus inefficient road infrastructure? And in every single case, according to Vivid's modeling, the picture is crystal clear. Green is simply better for the economy. Now, before Julia takes over, I want to go back to the beginning and reiterate our 2 messages. First, green investment could help drive growth across the African continent, and it could likely do so at a faster rate than investment in dirty initiatives. Second, high-income nations and international organizations need to listen up. It's time to be generous. A prosperous and green Africa would save the lives of real people. It would bring big climate benefits, and it would strengthen global trade too. We can't have a strong green world without a strong and green Africa. So I'll leave you with one thought. The world can't stand by to the crisis of climate change, nor to the great challenges of the African continent. International partners must look beyond their own borders, particularly following from COVID when we've all been so internally looking. We all refuse to sit back. We refuse to neglect some of the world's poorest populations. We refuse to sit back and let the destruction of our natural environments continue unchecked. And our reports reflect a strong rationale to act with green economic support and to do so urgently. So on this note, I'm going to pass over to you, Dr. Julia Bird.
Fantastic, thank you, Brian. As Brian said, it's an honour to be here and to follow such distinguished speakers and to be a part of this conversation. The messages for the work we have done are absolutely crystal clear, that investing in green policies today is not only going to support this transformation towards a greener future and lower emissions and a better protected environment, but it's also going to support the jobs and the output that we need to support economies worldwide. But today we're talking specifically about African economies. It's going to support the economies in which these investments are made to recover and to recover as quickly as possible from the crisis we're currently facing. So what I want to talk through in a bit more depth is the analysis that we've done and how we've gone about it and what this means. So at Vivid Economics, joint with the University of Oxford, we've been using our in-house input-output modelling, I3M, to consider a set of different policies and think about how these are going to impact the economy if we prioritise these policies and if we implement them today. So what we have done is taken a set of potential green policies in these specific economies, and we have taken, as Brian said, a set of historic traditional policies, such as investing in roads, investing in coal-fueled power plants. And we have modelled what they look like. So the investment requirements that are put into the economy when you support specific policies. Now, those policies are not only going to have direct impacts on the sectors that are being supported, but those impacts are going to filter out through the economy. If you build a road, you then create construction jobs, but you also have lots of different inputs that you need into that construction that come from elsewhere in the economy, or they come from abroad. If you invest in solar-powered power generation, the same message is absolutely true. And we're able to do a comparison of those using our modelling. And what this chart is showing you is average impacts across a set of green policies in South Africa. So in transport, we looked at green policies which include investment in electric buses, electric vehicle infrastructure, a bus rapid transit system. Now, these are all policies that we feel have got a lot of potential in South Africa. They are policies that reflect some of the existing comparative advantages that South Africa has as an automotive hub, as a producer of vehicles, and as a centre for potential research in this area. And you can see on the left-hand side here that the green bar shows that you could create 3 job years for every R1 million invested, and that is higher than what you see for the traditional comparison policy within transport. And then we also have, with the diamonds, the economic returns, the output. So we've got over R2.5 per every rand invested over a 20-year time horizon. Now, this is showing that these green investments are not solely good for the environment, but they're also good for the economy. And we can see that across the board. We can see that when we look at the energy sector, when we think about investing in solar, in hydro, that's going to create greater economic returns, greater jobs, and it's going to have that positive impact on emissions and on the environment. We've got a similar message in terms of building retrofitting, and we've got a similar message coming out when we're looking at some nature-based solutions, be that investing in agroforestry, be that in South Africa, investing in restoring mangroves, be that investing in peatlands, as Jean-Paul mentioned earlier, within the Congo. There's a whole host of options, and we set those out within our 2 papers, but we're getting this consistent message of really positive economic returns alongside the emissions and the environmental benefits. Next slide, please. So I wanted to dive in a little bit further into a couple of these in detail. So thinking about renewable energy, if we invest in solar generation, not solely as the previous slide showed do we get these high economic multipliers, but we're also doing something above and beyond what the modelling is showing, something greater for the economy. So we're reducing the vulnerability of South Africa and the DRC in the 2 reports that we're releasing today. We're reducing the vulnerability of both of these economies to fossil fuel price volatility. We're enabling broader growth because the greater the energy system, the stability of the energy system, the more that is feasible elsewhere within the economy, the better production that can be generated within the economy. And there's a real risk today that if we go back and we start investing in some of those traditional fossil fuel energy solutions, those things that we know about that have worked in the past, but are not the technologies of the future, there's a real risk that although that might create some immediate jobs, that's going to create some stranded assets, because a coal fuel power station 10 years from now is going to be faced with a very different global economy, where the price of carbon, as has already been mentioned, is far higher than we see it today, and where the tolerance of such emissions is no longer at today's levels. We're seeing huge global changes, and by making the right investments now, South Africa can move into an economy that is really reflective of the future and fight against emissions and negative environmental effects today. A couple of others to dive a bit further into: natural capital investments. Now, this is one that we saw sizable returns in both South Africa and in the DRC. And the great thing about natural capital investments is that the great thing is it supports the environment, which absolutely we want. The second great thing is it has sizable long-term economic returns, thinking about the tourism sector and the tourism that can be attracted if you have a wealth of natural habitats, thinking about the carbon offsets market, thinking about the opportunities in terms of jobs, in terms of protecting biodiversity. And we just had the descriptor review come out just a couple of weeks ago, talking about the economic and social value of preserving our biodiversity. There are these great long-run benefits of investing in natural capital, but it's also something that's incredibly quick to deploy. We could do it tomorrow. We know what's needed. It's easy technology. We know how to reforest areas. We know how to protect mangroves. We know how to protect peatlands. It's got low training requirements. We could use it to create jobs for people who have really been affected in the last year and who need jobs quickly. And we'd be building resilience into the economy, building productivity into the economy, whilst really focusing on the region and on the national economies. There's low leakage outside of the country. You don't need great inputs imported from abroad. Your stimulus spending would be going direct into the local economy. And very quickly, I will also touch on low emissions transport. I think one of the core trends that we're seeing in the coming decades and are already seeing in Africa is the rapid pace of urbanization. And done well, urbanization can be incredibly effective at creating productivity, creating agglomeration economies. But to do that, you need connectivity. And I think transport is a transformative area to invest in. And we're at an era where there is huge shifts in what can be done there. And our modeling is showing that if you invest in bus rapid transit systems and improve connectivity in urban areas, you are creating jobs today, you're enhancing output in the future, and additionally, you're going to be supporting this connectivity and this agglomeration economies. And that can be done across a wide range of countries, a wide range of towns and cities. Electric vehicles, more specific to South Africa, where you've got the automotive capacity, production capacity, but it's got a real strong job creation potential in research and up the supply chain in manufacturing for different components of this. And building retrofitting, solar panels, putting in small scale investments across housing is a very easy to scale up option, which again has high economic returns and helps build up that critical mass of demand, which then helps create scale and helps upstream producers really produce new capacity and expand production and helping the continent in the long term. Next slide, please. So we've got our full modelling results in the 2 papers that have been released today, but I just want to state that these modelling results, although incredibly positive, as I've just set out, aren't even capturing half the story. There is far more that these investments can unleash. So they're going to create jobs today, they're going to create outputs today and tomorrow, they're going to reduce emissions and support the environment. But a lot of these investments are also going to unlock broader productivity potential. So as I just stated, investment in transport system, connectivity, agglomeration economies, investment in energy systems, we're going to be able to enhance production capacities across the production line. Investing in traditional technologies today creates these real risks of creating stranded assets, assets that are of the past and not assets that are reflecting the way the economy is moving into the future. So this is a real opportunity for Africa to really think about what's next and how do we position ourselves right, helping people today and transforming the economy of the future. And at that point, I'm going to land on my final slide, which is a real call. We are doing further work in other economies, but we've found consistent messages from our analysis and our modelling so far. And that is that green investment can bring more jobs and greater economic gains, not solely in the short run, but also unlocking greater development opportunities in the medium to long term, and ensuring better environmental and social outcomes. This is a positive message in every direction, and it's one I really hope you take away today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia, for this presentation, and thank you to Brian too. It was really interesting, and I hope that both of you can share your presentation, because we have a lot of demands by the press, the members of the press, because they would like to be able to cover more in depth what you said, and having your reports and eventually also pictures would be easier for them to do properly their jobs. So now we'll turn to the Q&A session. I will kindly ask the members of the press to identify them by writing for which media they are representing today, and to use the little icon at the bottom of the screen to raise their hands, and eventually if you have someone the question is addressed to mention it. So I see already a hand raised. It's Mr. Jérôme Sekana Pene Papa. Mr. Jérôme Sekana Pene Papa, could you please introduce yourself and tell us to whom the question is addressed? You will be unmuted. No intention to mute the press here. Pouvez-vous, s'il vous plaît, débloquer votre micro? Could you please unmute the mic of Mr. Jérôme Sekana Pene Papa? He just raised his hand.
He already unmuted. Please unmute from yourself, sir.
So, si vous pouviez pousser sur le message qui vous est envoyé pour débloquer.
J'ai activé, voilà.
Voilà, merci.
Moi, c'est voilà. Moi, c'est Jérôme Sekana. Je suis journaliste économique responsable de l'agence Galaxy Media. J'interviens depuis Kinshasa et je travaille avec la CAC depuis très, très longtemps, une dizaine d'années. J'ai 3 petites questions. Mais avant de poser ces 3 petites questions, je voudrais d'abord féliciter la CAC, notamment Madame Vera Songwe, CA, que je vois à l'écran, parce que en ces moments de la COVID-19, vous envoyez des experts sur le terrain et vous obtenez des résultats aussi importants. Vous êtes à féliciter. Et mes félicitations s'ajoutent également par le fait qu'en Marrakech, vous étiez allé au chevet de nos caméramens que nous avions envoyés là-bas. Et ça nous avait vraiment beaucoup marqué. Félicitations, Madame Vera Songwe. Alors, la première question, moi, je l'adresse plus précisément à Jean-Paul Adam. Et peut-être Monsieur Kay pourrait également intervenir. Vous savez, la République démocratique du Congo, nous sommes au cœur du bassin du Congo. Donc, le bassin du Congo, nous régorgeons plus ou moins 65 à 70% des forêts. Mais nous avons des difficultés. Dans ces puits carbone, nous séquestrons plus ou moins 23 gigatonnes de CO2 l'an. Mais les dividendes en termes d'argent, nous n'arrivons pas à les percevoir. Et vous le savez très bien que le taux de déforestation en République démocratique du Congo, ou bien dans la zone qu'on appelle le bassin du Congo, est très faible. C'est 1% l'an par rapport à ce qui se passe en Amazonie, 4%. Alors, est-ce que votre rapport sur le plan de relance ou de la reprise verte a apporté un accompagnement technique à la République démocratique du Congo et à d'autres pays du bassin du Congo de pouvoir maximiser leurs chances pour récolter les dividendes de ce puits carbone? Ça, c'est la première question. Là, et vous êtes sans oublier que nous avons les tourbières aussi ici. Deuxième question, j'essaierai très bref.
On va peut-être, si vous me permettez, on va y aller peut-être one by one. On va y aller
OK, allons-y alors.
Comme ça. Je ne sais pas si tout le monde a compris la question. Est-ce que…
Oui.
Oui, monsieur Jean-Paul Adam.
Oui, Catherine, il n'y a pas de problème.
Mais est-ce qu'il faut la traduire pour Dr Songwe?
Je crois qu'il y a l'interprétation en simultané.
Très bien, très bien.
Alors, ça passe, mais docteur Songwe parle le français aussi, alors il n'y a pas de
parfait,
problème.
parfait.
Oui, oui.
Mais pour les autres,
Très bien d'ailleurs.
Que monsieur Jérôme Sekana Pene Papa est de l'agence Galaxy Media de la RDC. Mr. Sekana Pene Papa is from DRC, the agence Galaxy Media.
Alors, merci beaucoup pour la question. Et absolument, ce rapport parle justement aux opportunités sur des solutions fondées dans la nature. C'est vraiment les investissements qui peuvent... Excusez-moi, il y a un peu de bruit à l'arrière, mais c'est vraiment des opportunités à investir dans la nature pour créer des emplois. Le modèle qu'ils ont utilisé en RDC a démontré une très forte, un très grand retour sur les investissements autour de la réforestation, par exemple, c'est-à-dire de lier la création d'emplois à la réforestation, le lier à l'écotourisme, le lier aux industries de l'agroforestier, et aussi la possibilité aussi d'avoir du commerce sur le prix du carbone. Il est vrai qu'actuellement, le prix du carbone n'est pas élevé. Et j'ai cité des exemples qui sont autour d'un prix entre 3 $ par tonne à 5 $ par tonne. C'est vrai que ce prix n'est pas vraiment adapté aux besoins, mais en même temps, il y a des opérations qui se font dans d'autres pays. C'est une question de bâtir les compétences dans les pays et la CEA va appuyer dans ce sens pour qu'il y ait des opportunités pour faire le commerce sur le prix du carbone. Lors de la COP26, il y a l'occasion aussi que les pays africains peuvent demander un prix qui est vraiment développemental vis-à-vis le carbone. Et à noter que dans sa totalité, l'Afrique, on pourrait dire que, dépendant comment on calcule, l'Afrique est un émetteur positif, si on peut utiliser ce terme, parce que l'Afrique représente seulement 4% des émissions, mais représente 17% de la population. Alors, par tête d'habitants, l'Afrique n'émet pas du tout le même nombre de gaz à effet de serre que les pays développés. Et alors, c'est une question de comment monétiser cette opportunité. L'accord de Paris et la suite qui va être négociée à Glasgow nous offrent certaines opportunités. Le groupe des ministres de l'Environnement de l'Union africaine a réitéré sa position forte qu'il y a un mécanisme surtout qui se porte sur l'adaptation lors de la prochaine réunion. Mais c'est aussi à regarder l'occasion plus large, à créer des emplois dans les pays en visant des investissements à travers des véhicules pour le commerce sur le carbone. Et ce rapport démontre les opportunités, démontre l'aspect positif, surtout en ce qui concerne les emplois, et la valeur ajoutée qui est transmise dans toutes les couches de l'économie. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. On va d'abord passer, si ça ne vous dérange pas, on va prendre un par un, comme ça donne l'occasion à d'autres collègues de poser des questions. We'll take it one by one, so like that it gives the opportunity to each of the press, the members of the press, to at least ask one question. I will now give the floor to Mr. Bakari Gueye. Mr. Bakari Gueye, if you could please unmute Mr. Bakari Gueye. Voilà. Vous avez la parole, Monsieur Gueye. Si vous pouviez vous présenter, could you please introduce yourself?
Merci beaucoup. J'espère que vous m'entendez bien.
Parfaitement. Si vous pouviez.
C'est Bakari Gueye. Je suis rédacteur en chef de Initiative News, qui est un média mauritanien basé à Nouakchott. Donc, ma question concerne notamment, je voudrais savoir, est-ce que le fait de parler d'économie verte aujourd'hui en Afrique, est-ce que ce n'est pas un luxe? Et je voudrais savoir comment en fait la mise en œuvre de cette politique d'économie verte, elle va se passer comment dans des pays où les infrastructures sont très peu développées et où les investissements également ne sont pas du tout au rendez-vous. Je voudrais savoir par quel coup de baguette magique vous allez mettre en œuvre cette politique verte en Afrique. Je vous remercie.
Merci, Monsieur Gay, pour votre question. Dr. Songwei, would you like to take the floor and answer part of the question that has been asked by Mr. Bakari Gaye based in Mauritania? So we have a connection problem with Dr. Songwei. So I will ask maybe to Brian O'Callaghan, as you had that case study with your colleague Julia Bird. Maybe you could answer part of the question.
Absolutely, and it's a fantastic question. Thank you for it.
Thank you.
The findings of the report suggest that it's not about sacrificing green progress for economic progress. If you think about something like renewable energy investment, the needs for electricity access across Africa are significant. That needs to happen. It's not a luxury. The world, we would never ask anyone in the world to see that as a luxury. That is a necessity. And so spending on renewable energy to make that happen, it makes a lot of sense, right? We're not here saying we need to spend big on, high-tech research and development or carbon capture and storage. That's not what we're saying. We're saying let's focus on the opportunities that both create jobs and sustainable growth in African economies today, and at the same time meet some of those long-term climate objectives. So just to be clear, this is not about one or the other. You can do both.
Thank you, Brian. Very, very clear answer. I now give the floor to Mr. or Mrs. Gada Komi. Could you please unmute Mr. Gada Komi or Mrs. Gada Komi? Could you please, yeah. Monsieur ou Madame Komi, vous avez la parole. You are unmuted. Gada Komi, vous pouvez parler. Gada Komi, you have the floor. So we'll go to the next one and we'll come back because there is a connection problem. Please, could you unmute Mr. Dalton Armando Sitoe? Dalton Armando Sitoe, could you please unmute? Yes. Dalton, the floor is yours. Could you please introduce yourself and give us the media you're working for?
This is Mrs. Dalton, assistant. We're working from Ariella Boats. So, from Mozambique.
Okay, could you please speak a little bit louder? You calling from Mozambique. You're based in Mozambique.
So our question is to everyone, anybody who can answer. We would like to know how can Mozambique be more resilient post-COVID, looking at the study that you have done. How can we recover and be more resilient in terms of sustainability?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I will give the floor to Dr. Vera Songwei to be the first one to answer to that question. And it was mentioned that other case studies will be presented further in the year. Maybe we could get information on the countries on which those case studies will be. Dr. Vera Songwei, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. I think we are still working on the countries for which we will have the other case studies. We're hoping, of course, that we will have one on Ethiopia, one on Kenya. We're hoping to have 10, and we're working with those countries, one on Rwanda, most likely, to continue the process. I think these are the few that we have for sure in our pipeline. The rest, I think Egypt is another one in the pipeline, but I think we would like to work also together with the Global Commission on Adaptation with Ban Ki-moon and the team to see whether there's some countries that they will be interested in us doing so that we can come together and do something that's relevant, not just for the Economic Commission for Africa, but for other work that's going on. But we hope that by the end of the year, we will have this 10. Actually, before COP, we're planning to have them all done before COP. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sir Nicholas Kay, would you like to add something?
Good. Thank you. Yes, a good question. What can any country do? I mean, part of the answer, I think, is to, each country should have its own national plans in this area. Should have clearly, obviously, for climate, needs its own ambitious NDCs, and it needs its adaptation plans, but it needs a green recovery plan as well. Several countries do have them, but in terms of getting expertise for this, then obviously UNECA is one source of that. The African Union Commission and its Green Recovery Action Plan is another. So yeah, I think the answer is to work, work with others, use the expertise that's there, and come up with ambitious green recovery plans that suit each country, and use the urgency of COP26 and the deadline, if you like, to do that. And it's a role for everyone in that, civil society to raise their voices, media to raise awareness. It is, a constant and louder drumbeat that is needed to make sure that by November, by COP26, everybody is rising to the challenge that's there. So it's a very general answer, but I think it's hopefully helpful.
Thank you so much. Maybe Julia, you would like to add something? Julia Bird?
Sure, I can add some elements in terms of potential policies. Having not really looked having not looked at Mozambique in detail, but I do think there are lessons to be learnt from our case studies to date in the DRC and in South Africa. And I think that there are clearly a few areas within the economy that unleash economic potential, which is something we want all round. So that's investments in energy, investments in transport, but also can be done in a way that helps create this transformation. So there are some investments that inevitably every country wants. They want a better transport system. They want a more stable electricity system, energy system. They want greater production or energy generation capacity. We want all of those things, and they can be done in a way that use the newest of technologies, that support jobs, that help create this COVID recovery and bring a country towards a greener, more transformed future. And so I would absolutely recommend that Mozambique look into policies of that nature, things that, and reflective of the earlier question, things that are, this is not a sort of, can Africa afford to prioritize green options? This is actually ticking off a number of things that economies need at once. This is putting in the energy infrastructure, putting in the transport infrastructure, and creating that green transformation, and responding to the pandemic and creating economic stimulus, and look towards those transformational policies.
Thank you, Dr. Bird. Is there someone else that would like to add something? Brian, would you like to add something?
If I may very briefly,
yes, please, Jean-Paul, sorry.
No, that's fine. It's fine. It's fine. I think that and speaking a little bit to that question as well of the relevance, each country is of course slightly different, but if you look closely at the report, you will see that it's really focusing on things which are very practical and which can be done quickly, because the focus is as well creating jobs in the short term as well as in the long term. and the green opportunities that are possible. And I'll link that as well to the question that came up in the Q&A from Bloomberg. And if you look at the DRC report and the table which lists the different interventions, so it's looked at interventions that have a specific impact and compared them to traditional impacts. And if you look at the nature-based solutions, the nature-type programs investment, the one that has the most return is investment in irrigation. And you can see that in the 5 years, basically, essentially, for every 1 million rand invested, you get about 488 job years. When you have to click on the graph to get sort of that specific, but you can see that there's a very good return over the 5 years in terms of jobs, and then over 20 years, it's obviously even higher, almost 1,000. So it might be good that Julia perhaps speaks to that graph so that the members of the press can understand the figures and perhaps the concept of job years. I would suggest if she could give a little summary on that based on the question I saw in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, please, Julia.
Sure, absolutely. So what the graphs are showing, and if you look in the 2 published papers, you will see them for every policy that we've modelled. What they're showing is 2 things. So the bars in the chart, if you look at the left-hand side axis, are showing how many job years are created within the next 5 years per investment. Now, that investment in the South Africa case is million rand. I believe in the DRC it was billion francs that we landed on as our our unit of analysis. And every job year created is essentially the employment of someone within the national economy for 1 year within the next 5 years. So if you are seeing a bar that is higher, that means we're creating more jobs in the short term than a bar that is lower for the same amount of investment. Then you can also see the diamonds, which are reflective of the right-hand side axis. Now the diamonds, the higher up the diamonds are in the chart, that's showing us a greater economic return over the next 20 years. So in South Africa, for all of the policies, you can see that the green policies have got a higher economic return. We are getting more than 1 rand. So we're getting often 2, nearly 3 rand per every 1 rand invested in the policy. So this is economic returns of 2 to 1 or even 3 to 1 for these policies over the next 20 years. So this is showing that this is a really profitable, beneficial policy. Every rand that is invested is going to create greater economic output in the future that more than compensates for that. So these are the types of policies you might be able to encourage private sector participation, but even governments and international donors, you are going to see economic returns for these. So hopefully the individual specific policies are very clear in the paper as to what they are. I should also add, and I said this in the question in the chat, these are conservative estimates. So these are based on current technologies. These are based on what's currently happening in the economy. But as I said, for some areas like transport and energy, if you make those investments, you actually increase the production capacity of the economy as a whole. So the economic returns could be far larger than the estimates we've put in. So the 2 to 1 and the 3 to 1 that you are seeing in the paper are things that the modelling is showing will happen, but actually you can use these investments to create even higher returns. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Bird. We'll now try to give the floor to Therese Iseki. And I have also a question of Gada Komi. Maybe we'll try first to unmute Gada Komi. If it's not possible, the question was related to the weak health system in Africa. And how do you see the future if the pandemic lasts a couple more years? So that is the question that Gada Komi would like to address. I see, Dr. Bird, that you would like to answer. Would you like to share? No. So maybe, is there someone, Jean-Paul Adam or Dr. Songwe, that would like to give, oh, I see that we have Thérèse Iseki. OK. Thérèse Iseki, vous pouvez parler si vous le souhaitez.
Oui,
Et vous
bonjour chers. Oui, je suis Thérèse Iseki, je suis de l'Agence panafricaine d'information, la PANA.
Merci.
Je remercie la CEA et ses partenaires pour la constance dans la recherche de solutions aux problèmes qui minent l'Afrique. Mais après des rapports comme ceux-ci, je me pose toujours la question de savoir pourquoi l'Afrique ne fait pas taire les promesses pour passer aux actes. Les problèmes sont posés, les recommandations sont faites. Qu'attend l'Afrique?
Merci.
L'économie verte, il y a eu beaucoup de publications sur l'économie verte et sur l'économie bleue. La CA en a fait depuis un certain nombre d'années. On ne me parlera pas d'argent parce que nous trouvons de l'argent pour faire autre chose. Qu'est-ce qui nous empêche de nous engager? On ne fait que des promesses. Merci à tous.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Iseki, pour votre question. This is a question of political will. So I don't know if anyone would like to answer to this question on a global level. The importance of political will. Maybe Sir Kay would like to speak a little bit more about the global political will needed.
Trying to unmute. Okay, yeah, fine. You're absolutely right. It requires political will, and that is, you know, part of what the COP process is about. Each year, the whole world coming together to put their heads together to try and solve these problems. Am I encouraged whether that political will is there? Yes, I think I am. You know, in the last several months globally, there have been some significant moves on this side. I mean, for example, the commitment to net zero by China by 2060 and to peak in its emissions by 2030 is a very significant move. The election of President Biden and his return to the climate agreement, the Paris Agreement, is absolutely important as well. And there's some other major economies as well. South Korea, Japan as well have made some ambitious commitments on emissions. And I would say the UK as well. The Prime Minister Boris Johnson has announced his plans for a green industrial revolution and committed to a 68%, the most ambitious emissions reduction of any developed economy. So I think globally, this political will is building. And I'm sure in Africa as well, there are also many examples of committed leaders who understand the importance of this. I mean, there's lots of choices to be made, as people have said, and faced with hard economic conditions where people are unemployed and they need jobs and money is short. It is very, very easy to make the wrong choices. But I think when people sit down, they want to avoid the problem. For example, imagine back at the beginning of the 20th century, 1900 or something like that, you could be in the boardroom of a company where it's making some investment decisions about, shall it invest? It needs to sort of have a new transport system, distribution system around the country. It's doing very well as a business. And there's one person in the board who says, we should really expand our horse and carriages, and because we have that expertise, we have lots of horses, everybody knows how they work. There's another person at the board table saying, have you heard about this new thing called the motor car and the internal combustion engine? And, you know, this is the future and this is the way to go. Now, if the company sort of listened to the traditional, let's invest in the horses, that company would have been out of business within about 10 or so years. If the company listened to the man or woman on the board saying, invest in this new car business, then they would have been with the future. So now we have to make the right choices. Green is the sensible choice, economic choice. It is the choice for the future. Green energy, green recovery. If you want new infrastructure, make it green. If you want new healthcare, make it as green as possible. If you want new economy, make the jobs as green as possible. That way, you have a better future. Choosing the old technologies, you're going to be writing yourself out of the future. So I think the political will, the political understanding is there. And I think it's great that it's backed up now by really accurate research and examples by UNECA and our Oxford colleagues as well. These reports are really, really important for building that case for making the right choices. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Nicholas Kay. And as you said, we need really the 197 parties to be active in the climate convention to achieve success. We are now reaching the end of the event, so I will give the floor to Dr. Vera Songwe for the last concluding remarks. Thank you for participating to this event. Sorry for the members of the press that have still their hand raised and that submitted questions also through the chat box. I'm sure that the team, the wonderful team that we have, will answer to them, and be sure that the presentations that have been made today will be shared by mail after this event. Dr. Vera Songwe, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And let me just start by thanking all the members of the press that are here today for staying with us and for asking very insightful questions around this report. I think that gives us a little bit of comfort that one, we didn't work very hard for nothing, but I think more importantly that you're getting the message. And I think one of the important messages that really we want to take you to take away from this report is that, you know, we haven't, and I don't think you will find in this report any reference to the fact that, you know, Africa is not is the least polluting continent. You will find a lot of references to the fact that if we went green, we will be much better off. You will find a lot of references to the fact that if we decided to do more green stimulus, we will create more jobs, we will add more value. And so we're trying to move away from the argument that says, we didn't do all these bad things, so why should we do anything good? We are saying doing good is good for us, and doing good is profitable for our business. And that's really the argument that we want to make. And also doing good is good for our women. 23 million African women die every year because they're burning fossil fuels. And so we cannot afford that. And so essentially it is also about our health that we're talking about. So this really is the message. And so we get it on the continent. But also part of what we want to say in the report is that we expect the international community to play its part. And you saw the numbers in terms of if we put a price on carbon, what would that mean for Congo, Brazzaville, for Congo DRC, for Cameroon, for all these countries that are sitting on carbon sinks and that are doing good for the economy and doing good for the world and not getting any benefits from it, but getting lectured about what they should or should not do. And so we do need, you know, a call to action from Africa, not saying we need more money, but saying you need to pay us for doing all the good that we're doing for the world today. And I think that Africa's voice is missing in that debate. And this is where I think having Sir Nicholas Kay here is very important, because hopefully you can begin to take that message that when we come to COP, we will be asking for what is duly ours in terms of what we're doing right and for which we are not getting, I think, a satisfactory return. It is unconscionable that DRC women are burning fossil fuels and dying and saving the rest of the world. And the world sits around and thinks that that's okay. And I think that those kinds of injustices and inequalities should not persist. And hopefully that there is a new multilateral environment that can actually bring this to the fore and say, let's just slap a price on carbon. I think also that as we do that, of course, African countries need to put in place better policies to attract the private sector, a better enabling environment for private sector investments. We've talked about battery pricing, we've talked about renewable energy. We know that all this have a very high rate of return on them. And so investing in Africa's renewable journey, in Africa's green journey, is a profitable investment. It creates jobs and it does well for companies. So we hope that we can also crowd in the private sector, but we need some additional concessional resources. That is why we are calling for a special drawing rights release on-lending of those special drawing rights into first vaccines. We started with vaccines, we'll end with vaccines. We need vaccines to reopen our economies. But once those economies are open, we need to be able to access resources, either through debt for nature swaps, through other impact investment mechanisms, through capital markets, but at much cheaper and much more accessible rates. And we believe that the special drawing rights can do that. So financing is important, but Africa is proposing new ways of getting that financing, which we hope can work for the developed world and for the developing world to take us to where we want to be and grow in a more sustainable fashion. So this really is the message, is we can do it together, but we must shape at COP26 a much more multilateral system that listens to all and, you know, works for all in an equitable way. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vera Songwe, for these concluding remarks. I would like to warmly thank all the participants that took the time to stay with us and to share their experience with the press. Thank you to the members of the press for attending this event. And I wish you all a very nice day, reminding you that in about 1 hour and a half, the high-level panel will take place. And I wish you a good evening, a good afternoon, or a good morning, wherever you are based. Thank you and bye-bye. Take care and be safe.
Thanks to Oxford University, Vivid Economics. Thank you so much for the collaboration. Thank you. St. Nicholas K, thank you. And Christian, thank you as well. Merci.
Thank you. Merci à tout le monde.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Merci beaucoup. À la prochaine fois.